This morning. He has been getting saved all morning long.
Fine. Fine. Report me to my manager. It's Dan Evans. Dan Evans. Goodbye. Anyway,
I've
we're
gotten
here
those calls.
So when we talk about foam, and I was about to say the stomach again, but when we talk about foam that was in the airways and the lungs, uh, one of the indications of foam, isn't it true, is that the heart stops and doesn't provide enough oxygen to the body, and the result is a significant amount of foam.
Usually it's that the heart isn't functioning appropriately for an extended period of time that's leading to respiratory failure, which is causing accumulation of fluid in the lungs. Usually when you have a sudden cardiac death, you don't have enough time for that pulmonary edema to develop because your lungs are essentially stopping at the same time that your heart is stopping.
So if I understand you correctly, then that if there's a sign that the heart isn't working properly, regardless of whether there's signs or not, though of an unhealthy heart, that's when you're going to get that foam situation, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So I guess my question is this, is that if in fact Tammy Daybell's heart was immediately stopped by compression or asphyxiation, that's an immediate stopping of the heart. Why is there foam in her system then?
Well, asphyxia isn't going to immediately stop the heart. The heart will stop once it's not able to get enough oxygen to continue to pump. And that's going to take minutes if a person is being asphyxiated. And then that will allow time for the lungs to start to fail and fluid to accumulate.
Or it could be that the heart wasn't functioning properly and it stopped and foam developed within her system as a result of a heart that wasn't working properly, correct?
So what you're describing is congestive heart failure. And in that case, when we look at the lungs under the microscope, we see other evidence of congestive heart failure, which is usually old bleeding into the lungs from leaky vessels, which causes macrophages or the inflammatory cells to come in and clean it up. And that was not seen in her. So this was not a congestive heart failure.
But when you come up with a determination that the death is undetermined and there's absolutely no signs, let's say there's no bruising, let's say there is nothing indicating any sort of cause of death, and yet we have someone who's passed away. You make an undetermined, that in that situation, without any signs or any other collateral information, you make a determination that it's an undetermined death, correct?
If you have no other collateral information, investigative information that leads you to any other conclusion.
And when you make a determination of an undetermined death and there's no indication of any cause of death, you just may never know. The person just died. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And in a situation where the person just dies, you could have an absolutely healthy heart, correct?
You can.
You can have an absolutely healthy lung, correct?
Correct.
You can have absolutely healthy organs in every single manner, and yet the person can still die, correct?
Correct.
And that's not limited to someone who's 49 years old. That could be an athlete on a basketball court who passes away suddenly without any notice of anything or any sign of any damage or disease, correct?
Could be.
And that athlete could be a 17-year-old athlete playing in a basketball game and suddenly just passes away and that would be an undetermined death, correct?
Not necessarily. It depends on the autopsy. And in that kind of case, especially with a young person like that, that is where we start to think about genetic arrhythmia disorders, and we would do genetic testing.
Okay. And what that means is that you would be looking back at their past as to whether or not there's any family history of any heart issues or anything like that, correct?
Correct.
And in this particular situation, there was a notation on her medical records which indicated that Tammy Daybell's family had some heart issues that were listed and noted on her medical records. You recall that?
I do.
Okay. Now, on the issue of asphyxia, you talked about the bruises on her arms, and the vast majority of them were on the right arm. Is that correct?
Correct.
There were a number of them that you're claiming are bruises were on the right arm, and then one on the left, right?
Yes.
And then a mark on her chest. Okay. So you talked about what you claim are the 4 levels of asphyxia. And the first one you mentioned would have been exclusion of oxygen by way of choking, correct?
It could be exclusion of oxygen by anything.
Now, in Tammy Daybell's situation, there was no sign of any broken or malfunctioning airway that had been blocked physically. Is that correct?
Correct.
You didn't see any damage to the neck or the throat or any of the, and I'm going to hack the bone that's called the heat.
The hyoid.
Thank you. I'll never get it right. I could practice and I'll never get it right. That wasn't cracked or broken or anything like that, correct?
No, there was damage to the muscles on the right because of the embalming process. So we weren't able to do a full examination, but there was nothing on the left.
Okay. And then you talked, the second one would have been neck compression.
Yes.
And there were no indications of any bruising that or fingerprints or marks suggesting that Tammy Daybell was choked or someone had squeezed her neck to cause her to die that way, correct?
Correct.
And then the next one you mentioned was chemical asphyxiation, and there's no indication. You did an extensive review of potential chemicals that could have caused this, correct?
Correct.
And the only thing you came up with was the fluoxetine, which was the medication she was taking, correct?
Correct.
And did you do a cross-check as to whether or not any of these homeopathic or any of these essential oils or other items could potentially interact in a way that could cause her some medical issues?
So most of the essential oils and homeopathic medications that are out there have low overdose potential. There's still a potential for overdose, but because of that, testing for those things is not offered in most reference labs. And so we wouldn't have been able to rule any of that out, but there was no evidence at the scene that she was overtaking any of these things.
Okay. And you don't know the quantity of those homeopathic medicines or the oils or the other things that she was taking, correct?
No.
And if you were to make a determination and you did have that, would that aid you in maybe considering that as a possible option?
It could.
Okay. Now, the last one you mentioned was a mechanical asphyxiation. And I don't know if this one falls into the subject of you cover up the mouth or you cover up the chest physically with something to stop the breathing. Is that what that is about?
So exclusion of oxygen would be something that covers the mouth, covers the nose or airway. So that would be like a suffocation. With mechanical asphyxia, we see mechanical asphyxias very frequently. And so the classic situation is somebody who's working under their car and the car jack fails and the car falls on the chest, and then the chest is no longer able to rise. Those people die of a mechanical asphyxia.
And the type of asphyxia you're talking about is the stoppage of the breathing. Tammy Daybell, someone was trying to stop. That's what you're suggesting, is someone was trying to stop Tammy Daybell from breathing, physically covering up her airway. Is that correct?
Correct.
So explain to me, with the bruises on the arms, did you see any scratches on the fingers or any sign of any DNA under the fingers?
So in this case, she had been prepared for burial. She had been washed, cleaned, and there was also mold on her fingers from the internment. So at this point, there would be no trace evidence.
And there were no scratches of any kind that would indicate any kind of a struggle. Is that correct?
Correct.
Nothing, in fact, to indicate any kind of a struggle, correct?
The bruises could indicate a struggle, but it's, again, nonspecific.
And when you say non-specific, we don't know how those bruises got there, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So if someone's holding Tammy's Daybell's breathing, that same person then at the same time would be holding her arms down as well?
Or there's more than one person. I don't know.
Okay. But the suggestion is that you're saying someone was stopping her breathing, and potentially there could be another person there who's restraining the arms. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm not suggesting anything, but that is a possibility.
Okay. You talked a little bit about rigor mortis, and when you have a pulmonary edema, that speeds up the process of rigor mortis, does it not?
No,
Okay. When you're talking about stiff and cold, again, that's a subjective determination, correct?
correct.
You could walk up to somebody and hold their arm, and it could be stiff and cold, but that doesn't give you a distinct determination as to when that what that means specifically, correct?
Correct.
In fact, unless you're someone in your profession, making that determination, the best way is that you're there and you evaluate the level, because that's an advancing determination of when someone starts to become cold, and it increases as time goes on, correct?
Correct.
So if someone makes mention of the fact that something is cold or stiff, that's really doesn't give you any sort of information or determination as to how you would apply that to the time of a cause of death, correct?
Correct.
And again, as far as the cause of death, again, this is a subjective determination by you. You really can't say to any specificity when the cause of death was or had occurred in this case. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And again, what kind of medical records, which specifically medical records did you review?
I would have to go back and look at the list, but I know that we looked at primary care physician records and urgent care records from 2007 to 2019.
Okay. I'm sorry, again, from when?
2007 to 2019.
And in reviewing the medical records, you never saw any treatment for any low blood pressure or anything like that. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. Were you provided information about Tammy Daybell having dizzy spells
Yes.
and maybe some fainting issues?
Yes.
Okay. Balance issues?
I don't recall balance issues.
Okay. And in terms of the contents of her stomach, you found some, at least what I describe as potatoes or something like potato-like substance in her stomach?
Yeah, she had about 3.5 ounces of a pink liquid that looked like it had food substances that appeared to be consistent with potatoes and peanuts.
Judge, that's all I have. Thank you.
All right. Derek?
Thank you, Your Honor. Dr. Marsden, you were just asked about the stomach contents. You recall that question?
Yes.
Do contents in a stomach tell you anything one way or the other if someone's thrown up?
No.
And you talked about seeing remnants of potatoes and peanuts. Is that what you recall?
That's what it appeared to be.
Did it appear to be a Big Mac?
No.
You were asked about learning that Tammy had dizzy spells or fainting spells. Do you recall that question?
Yes.
Do you recall where that information came from?
That information was from the police report, which was obtained from her husband.
So the only information regarding dizzy or fainting spells came from Chad Daybell.
Correct.
Anything in the medical records that indicated dizziness or fainting spells?
No.
Did it surprise you not to see Tammy's family at the exhumation?
No.
And you were asked about some of the suspicious circumstances involving some missing kids. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Did you learn that those missing kids were Chad's new wife's kids?
Yes, I think I knew that.
And Tammy Daybell was Chad's recently deceased wife.
Yes.
With regard to this idea of heavy lungs, did you find any signs of a medical condition which would cause heavy lungs?
No.
Did you believe that to play into a cause of death in this case?
I think that it is the result of the cause of death, but it is not itself the cause of death.
In looking at the history, Tammy's medical history and her family's medical history that was noted in her records, any concerns in relation to Tammy's heart based on that?
No, and her records we specifically asked did not include any sudden cardiac deaths in young individuals in her family that would indicate a genetic cause of heart disease.
And counsel went over with you again, death by essentially asphyxiation by exclusion of oxygen. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Are there ways that someone can cause someone else's death in that manner without leaving any signs or external injuries?
Absolutely.
Are you aware of some of the mechanisms or way a person could asphyxiate someone else without leaving those signs when we're talking about the exclusion of oxygen category?
Yes.
What are those?
This would include things like smothering with a pillow, putting a bag over the head, putting a weight on the chest so that the chest can't rise. These are all potential things that would not necessarily leave any sign.
And the last one, the weight on the chest, would be mechanical asphyxiation? Would it
Yes.
fall into that? And you were asked about the bruises and indicated it could indicate there was more than one person there. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Could it also indicate someone kneeling on a chest and holding someone down?
Yes.
In reviewing possible causes of death, what did you determine in relation to a seizure as a possible cause?
That it is extremely unlikely and improbable.
What did you determine with regard to cardiarrhythmia as a cause?
The same, extremely unlikely and improbable.
And again, ultimately, what did you determine the cause to be?
Asphyxia,
And what did you determine the manner to be?
homicide.
In your experience, or would it be fair to say that dead bodies don't generally roll out of bed?
True.
I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, Ms.
Judge,
Blake.
could I have recross, please?
On which issue?
On the kneeling issue and the falling out of the bed.
I think those are within the scope of the cross.
I believe those were covered in cross as well, so I'm not going to allow any recross on that. I don't think the redirect went outside the scope to open a new topic, so I'll deny the request for any recross at this point. That will conclude the testimony then of Dr. Marsden. And with her testimony being concluded, is she going to remain under subpoena
No, Your Honor, she can be released.
from the defense?
I didn't subpoena her, Judge.
Okay, so that concludes your testimony. Thank you for appearing this morning. You can be excused.
Thank you.
State can call us next witness.
The state will call investigator Ricky Wright.
Judge, that looks like Officer Hermosillo.
That's what
to
I was
me.
thinking.
That's who I think it is. Unless Officer Wright is muscled up a little bit, but
They may have gotten a little confused. So if we may have just a moment.
Yes.
Swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Yes.
All right, I'll note now the witness has been sworn. Before we begin with direct, I want to inquire, Officer Wright, have you watched or viewed in any way any of the testimony that's taken place in this trial since it started?
No, I have not.
Okay, have you talked to anyone else about testimony they've given at trial?
No, I have not.
Very well. With that in mind, then, Ms. Blake, if you'd like to inquire, you may.
Thank you. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
Yes, Rick Wright, W-R-I-G-H-T.
And where are you currently employed?
I am currently employed as a contract special investigator for the FBI in Pocatello.
And what position did you hold prior to that?
Yes, I was a special agent with the FBI.
And for purposes of today, would you prefer investigator or agent?
Investigator is fine, or Mr. Wright is fine.
And how long were you employed with the FBI?
I was a special agent for 24 and a half years.
Do you have or did you receive any specialized training in order to be a special agent?
Yes, I attended the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia in 1997. That's approximately 4 months. And then after that, I was assigned to my first office, which was the Denver division in Denver, Colorado.
How long did you work in that division?
I worked there for over 21 years.
In addition to the initial training to be a special agent, have you received or did you receive any specialized training?
Yes, after my initial new agents training, I worked a variety of violations throughout my career, primarily criminal matters for the FBI. The FBI is roughly divided in half between criminal investigations and national security investigations. So I worked primarily criminal investigations and received a variety of specialized training in those type of investigations that I conducted.
What were some of the areas that you received specialized training in?
So initially I worked drugs and organized crime cases. And then for a period of about 8.5 years, I worked financial crimes and public corruption. And then for the last 11 years in the Denver division, I worked violent crime and specialized primarily in violent crimes against children. And that was before I transferred to the Pocatello resident agency in late 2018. And once there, I worked more general criminal matters for the FBI there in Pocatello. So throughout my career, I received specialized training in all those types of investigations, particularly regarding crimes against children, which was much of my career. I received specialized training in responding to missing abducted children, sex trafficking of children, other exploitation of children, international parental kidnappings. And I received that training. Usually most of these trainings were 1 to 5 day trainings, usually once or twice a year. Much of that came from within the FBI, from the Violent Crimes Against Children unit or the Behavioral Analysis unit or the Child Abduction Rapid Deployment teams that the FBI uses for child abductions, or from outside agencies or organizations like the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and other law enforcement agencies.
And you indicated in about 2018, you ended up transferring to the Pocatello area.
Yes.
And is that a different division? How is that in relation to where you were at before in Denver?
Yes. So I transferred to the Pocatello Resident Agency of the Salt Lake City Division of the FBI. The Salt Lake City Division is the headquarters. The headquarters is located in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that division covers all of Utah, Idaho, and Montana. The Denver division covered all of Colorado and Wyoming. And so within a division, there are often these satellite offices called resident agencies, as was the case with the Pocatello Resident Agency being one. Within Idaho, there were 4 resident agencies at that time, one in Pocatello, another in Boise, Lewiston, and Coeur d'Alene, I believe.
And when you transferred to that resident agency in Pocatello, how many agents were employed at that resident agency?
Yes, at that time, there were 5 agents in the Pocatello Resident Agency. 3 of them did criminal work, which I was one, and the other 2 did national security work. That resident agency covered really all of eastern Idaho, about 17 counties, I believe. Our supervisor for the criminal agents in Pocatello was actually located in Boise, and that was Doug Hart.
At some point while working there in Pocatello, did you become involved in a search for a missing child named JJ Vallow?
Yes, I did.
Can you explain a little bit about why the FBI became involved?
So the FBI was contacted by the Rexburg Police Department about a child missing in their jurisdiction. That was on November 27th of 2019. And I spoke with Lieutenant Ron Ball and I believe Detective Ray Hermosillo from the Rexburg Police Department about that missing child and the circumstances under which he was missing. The FBI assists in missing children cases because of the Federal Kidnapping Act. Under that act, when children are missing because of the potential interstate nature of a kidnapping, it is a potential federal crime. Unfortunately, we usually don't know up front whether a federal crime has been committed or even if there is a kidnapping that has taken place. But because of the time-sensitive nature of those types of investigations, it's necessary to respond right away. And allow the FBI's resources to assist with that. And so when they described the circumstances under which Joshua Vallow or JJ Vallow was missing, we believe that met these requirements of the FBI being involved. And generally, when we have a child, we define that as a child of tender years that's missing under suspicious circumstances. We should get involved. And a child of tender years, I believe, is defined as 12 and under.
And did you know how old JJ Vallow was?
I believe he was 7 at the time.
When you first became involved, did you know anything about Tylee Ryan also being missing?
Shortly thereafter, I became aware that JJ had a sibling named Tylee Ryan. We did not realize that she was missing from Idaho at that time.
Do you recall approximately when yourself and or the FBI became involved in the search for JJ Vallow?
Yes, really almost immediately after that telephone call from the Rexburg Police Department, we offered our assistance and began to communicate with them on how we could provide further assistance. We opened an investigation. I believe we opened it as a police cooperation matter at first, and then within a few days changed that to a kidnapping classification. And I was assigned as the case agent on that. And due to the scope of the investigation, really the size of the investigation, we actually assigned a second case agent was assigned, and that was Travis Homer, also at the Pocatello RA.
And you'd already talked about being contacted by the Rexburg Police Department. Do you know if there were additional agencies involved in investigations linked to JJ being missing?
Yes, there were some related investigations being conducted by other agencies.
Do you know what those other investigations were looking into?
Yes, I do.
And what were those things?
So Rexburg Police Department, of course, was looking into the JJ being missing, but the Fremont County Sheriff's Office, also in Idaho, was looking at the death of Tammy Daybell. And there were two agencies in Arizona that I became aware of that were looking at incidents in their jurisdiction. That was in the Gilbert Police Department was one, and they were looking into an attempted shooting of Brandon Boudreaux, and the Chandler, Arizona Police Department was looking into the death of Charles Ballo.
Would it be fair to say that this turned into a joint investigation?
Yes,
And did you personally become involved in the investigation?
yes, I did.
Did you become involved in the investigation into Tammy Daybell's death?
Yes, I did.
And then did you also investigate the JJ and Tylee being missing?
Yes,
Did you ultimately assist in investigating their deaths as well?
yes.
And I think you indicated that you were assigned or you were the case agent. Can you explain a little bit about what the case agent does?
So really, when an investigation is open at the FBI, there's a case agent, or sometimes called a case manager, that is assigned. Most cases have one case agent, and due to their size, can be handled by one agent. So the agent has the responsibility for conducting the investigation, whether that's gathering evidence, conducting interviews, and so forth. And but the FBI, that agent can also call upon additional resources. Often that's other agents that may work in the unit, other staff within the office, and also pull up from resources from outside the office, but within the FBI. The FBI, being a national organization, has considerable resources, and that can include administrative, analytical, technical assistance, and so forth.
In this case, did you actually end up requesting some additional assistance?
Yes, I did.
And specifically, did you request assistance in looking at location data associated with Alex Cox or devices associated with him?
Yes, there were a number of devices, digital devices, recovered during the course of the investigation. Many of those were processed by the regional computer forensics laboratory in Salt Lake City. As also, for many of those digital devices, they were cell phones, and we were able to get records associated with them, including location data. Many of those records went to a member of the FBI's cellular analysis survey team, who reviewed those records and helped us interpret them and review them.
And do you recall specifically which agent from the CAS team looked at the records?
Yes, that was Agent Nick Balance in the Phoenix, Arizona division.
As he would go through that information, would he share it with you?
Yes.
And did he provide information to assist you further in your investigation regarding location data linked to Alex Cox or a device associated with him?
Yes, there was one particular device that Alex Cox seemed to use extensively, and Nick Balance was reviewing records for that device, transactional records, and location information, and providing me with and other investigators with information that we could follow up with from those records.
And in relation to that information, were there specific time frames that you were interested in or looked at?
Yes. So this particular device had extensive location information within it. And in the initial stages of the investigation, when we learned that JJ was missing and shortly thereafter that Tylee was also missing from Idaho, we didn't know really where they had gone missing exactly and when they had gone missing. Initially, it was as much as potentially 3 months they had been missing from sometime around August until the investigation was starting here in late November. And so over the course of that, the next ensuing months, we were able to narrow that time frame down significantly to help us determine where they had been or where they had last been seen and when they had gone missing. And that was critical for us to determine what had happened to them, just because it was hard to know where and when in time to look at the various types of information that would be available to identify what had happened to them. And so by approximately April of 2020, we had narrowed down that they had both been went missing in September of 2019. Tylee appears to have gone missing first, sometime around the 8th or the 9th of September was our best information, and that JJ had gone missing approximately 2 weeks later, around September 22nd or September 23rd. So I requested at that stage in the investigation, we had not been able to locate the children, and Nick Balance had been providing location information.
Judge, at this point, it's becoming a significant narrative. Can the state ask some questions?
There's an objection there on
Yes.
narrative. I'll sustain that. Go ahead, Ms. Blake.
So in determining the last known sighting of Tylee being around September 8th or 9th, and the last known of JJ around September 22nd or 23rd, what time period did you initially focus in on in relation to location data?
So I requested that Nick Balance look at those timeframes in September related to the children, and he was doing that and providing us with information. And due to the size and the amount of this information, I asked for him to provide me with the same information that he was reviewing, and put it in a format that I could review, that I could start that process of also looking at that data and see if there were potential avenues for investigation. So he provided me with a file of all of the location information for that particular device for really all of September of 2019, from September 1st through September 30th.
At some point, did you also end up requesting location data for the month of October?
I did.
And why did you request location data for the month of October?
So there were incidents that happened in October, not necessarily related to the children, but related to other components of this joint investigation. And at a later date, it was actually after the children had been recovered. I requested him, Nick Balance, provide me the records for all of October, and I did a similar review as I did for the September data, and I completed that in September of 2020.
And when you were reviewing this data from September and October, were you also following up on information that you gained from that location data?
Yes, it was really a process. As I said, Nick Balance initially was giving